Okay, once again, welcome everyone on this wonderful, what is it, July 1st. And we're so fortunate to have Dan Brock, who has so many different careers in his life. He has worked at Disney. He's created Avatar technology for the film Avatar. He's done at the University of Arizona. He was very active creating their technical effects in the theater and film department. And he worked in the Defense Department. He's been all over the map, literally. So we are so honored to have him and to hear some of his, not only his technical expertise, but his sensitivity to global views and what he's gained by moving to the Philippines after all this huge career in our worldview. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Gloria. I want to let everyone know I have a little bit of a cold, so if I go to mute or stop the video briefly, then you know I'm probably coughing or something, just to let you know that. But I'm really happy to be here, and I've been with the science fiction, the Hard Science Fiction Group meeting here in Tucson for a number of years. In fact, one of the images I have that I'm going to talk about is from that. So I'm really honored to be asked to be part of this this group and to talk today. So I'm going to begin, if that's okay, because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to answer any questions that people have. I know some people have questions. We'll have questions, and let me see if I can get this going here. There we go. And all right. Okay, so I'm Dan Brock, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about my experiences here being a sci-fi guy in the Philippines. You know, what is that like? What's it like being in the Philippines? Well, it's been quite an expansive experience for me. The next thing that I want to do is, let's see, there we go. The next thing I want to do is talk about what I'm going to discuss today. And the first thing is the transitioning of a science fiction guy myself to the Philippines, what that was like. Reading and writing science fiction, the Philippines versus the US or the West, which I may or may not answer some of your questions. Now, let me say just in the beginning that if you do have a question, feel free to ask it while I'm talking, because I want you guys to feel free to be able to interrupt if you need to. And if there's something that you want some expansion on or further elucidation of the information. One of the things that I'm also going to talk about is concepts that inspire science fiction and what my current research is and what I've been looking into. And then at the very end, we're going to have an open discussion, hopefully, where whatever you want to present, you can present and question me. So this photograph is something I took back in 2018 when I was exiting the Hard Science Fiction meeting at the Arizona Inn. And this is really interesting because my car, which is a first generation Honda Insight, it's on the right, was parked next to a perfectly restored Austin Healey 3000 convertible from the 60s. I don't know if you know anything about those vehicles, but they are fairly rare. My sense was that there was an important message being conveyed to me regarding a friend of mine, Tom Barber, at this particular time. Back in the 1960s, he used to own one of these cars. This event for me was what Carl Jung might call a synchronicity. That's when the physical and the non-physical conspire together to bring forward information that could be helpful for you. Tom, unfortunately, what I discovered after I took this photograph, which I wanted to share with Tom, I discovered that he had passed away. And he'd passed away about a month or two before I got in contact with him. But this particular event sort of spurred me on to contact him, which was what I considered to be a little bit beyond the normal for me. We all experience synchronicities, so it comes down to whether or not we acknowledge them. That's my contention. So transitioning a science fiction guy to the Philippines, what was that like? Well, my purpose was meaningful, but the job was a drag. So I felt like it was time to leave. I really loved my work at the U of A at the film school, but I could die in my job. I felt like my coffin should have been placed underneath my desk so that if I died at my office computer, I could just roll right into it. It's a pretty glib perspective, but it's how I felt. So considering all the situations and the alternatives and financing and living in the US, it just didn't add up to the pursuit of happiness for me anymore. Most of all, I felt a burning desire to support my own vision and activities, which was hard for me to do in a full-time job. So I had a lot of connections that came up with the Philippines, and my husband was born there in the Philippines. I had a lifetime of synchronicities, and they just kept popping up. And after consulting with my husband, we decided it was time to sell everything and get out of Dodge. So my plan was to retire from the U of A, but a major concern was disposing of my book collection at home and at the office, which was plentiful, let me tell you. No doubt it was time for everything in my life to go. I sold a lot of books on eBay and traded some at Bookman's used bookstore in Tucson. And I probably repurposed over 1,000 books, which was quite a lot. So anyway, I resettled in another country, in the Philippines, and specifically I'm in Dumaguete City and Negros Oriental in the Philippines. And Negros is the island that I'm on. And this is my self and my husband here in downtown Dumaguete, right on the boardwalk. Now here is a image that kind of gives you an idea of what the island is like here. This is about as far west from Dumaguete as I could go on a paved road, which ended close to the top of a local mountain range. The image looks east, so you're looking east where the sun would rise. And on the right is a hydroelectric plant. You see a little bit of steam coming up there. There's a hydroelectric plant, which is how we get a lot of power here. Most of the power in this area in Dumaguete comes from this hydroelectric operation. You can see in the middle of the picture, close to where the cloud line is, a little smattering of white, and that is the town of Dumaguete. So Dumaguete is, a sea town where I live. So I was here, and I was really poised for adventure and adjustments to living in a different culture. So after residing for 60 years in the U.S., there was a large change resulting from my move, which affected me emotionally. So here's a smattering of some of my observations. This is a shop in downtown Dumaguete, and it's a gun store. And I was a little bit surprised because I was used to seeing these in Arizona rather regularly, but I saw one here in downtown Dumaguete. Now you'll notice on the lower right on the front door, there is a ice cream sign. So this is a gun and ice cream store. Very different kind of situation than I was expecting to find here. They would sell ice cream in the gun store and military paraphernalia shop. The other thing I discovered, and this was on the island that my husband was from, which is called Samar, which is just sort of east and north of here. And while we were driving in a remote area going to his hometown, I came across a 5-story concrete Jesus being constructed in the middle of a rice field. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really different. What does this pertain to? How does this figure into the larger framework of Christianity in Philippine society? Then when I was in my husband's hometown, and this is a photograph of the back of the car that I had just bought, my husband's mom, which is to the right, said that the local priest, I should elicit the local priest to put a blessing on my vehicle. So I did that. And this is the priest reading from a liturgical sort of book that he had, saying a prayer for the car. And he went around the car and sprayed holy water all around the car. So there was a protection process that he went through to protect the vehicle. And this apparently was fairly common. A common thing performed in the Philippines. When we were coming back from Samar, we were on a ferry, and I passed passed through the harbor area of the city called Cebu, and you can see some of the skyline in the background. Well, this image here in the front, just below the skyline in the water, is the keel of a boat that's overturned and sunk in the middle of the harbor, but there's a flag on it. Well, my question is why is there a flag on it? Well, nobody bothered to clean the boat out from its capsizing in that location, but they did place a flag on it so that you'd know, because the water level would change with high and low tides, where the sunken boat was. This was also very different. I had a friend of mine that said, well, what is that, like a sunken submarine, or what is it? I said, nothing so fancy, believe me, it's just a sunken boat. And the flag might have said, welcome to the Philippines, was my take on it. So anyway, I kind of thought, a lot of Filipinos, have an idea of Westerners, and Westerners might fancy themselves being more like a James Bond, but as hard as I try, I'm not really that person, especially here in the Philippines. And when I sent these photographs, I asked a friend of mine, do you see any similarities? And they said, yes, there's water in both pictures. Well, that's probably true. And then this photograph here I took of a sign not very far from where we live. And what's interesting is that the globe in this picture is not centered over the New World of North and South America, but over the Pacific, and the Philippines is in the center.
Philippines are over what letter? Or in between what letter? Oh, we've frozen. Can anybody else hear me? Dan has frozen. Now, he may not be able to come back, or well, wait a minute. I do have his entire show. So, wait, he's probably going to try to log back in. He warned me of this problem, so he downloaded his entire slideshow, and I guess I should go find it now, which I am doing. As you wait for him to try to get back, I'm trying to get into my channel and find it, make it public. I guess I'll have to make it public. Just hang in there, folks. Technical difficulties, but one of us will resume the show in a minute. I don't know how many people are affected. How many people are hearing me? Are most of you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to get a head count of whether I'm also affected, or if that was. Okay, I'm going into my other YouTube window, and I'm now going to find that show among the videos here. Content, I guess it's under content, and Dan Brock, and it's set at private. I'm going to make it public, if only for long enough to do it, and publish it. And hopefully that works and it didn't take any time. Now go back to the Zoom meeting. I'm going to share screen now and find that show. And it will be the same slide. So I just have to remember it's that slide with the trash thing. Hopefully he has some, maybe he has.
Hi, I'm Dan L. Brock, and I'm going to make a presentation here today. Okay.
I'm coming up to the right slide now. Okay. Oh, now he wants to be admitted. Okay, so we'll see.
The globe is not over the new world.
Okay, so we have mine in reserve.
I'm finally back.
Okay, well, I in the meantime, I loaded your show, so if it happens,
Oh,
you want to just bail
Just-
out.
yeah, just as I was talking about the internet being really important here, it goes out. So
See?
that was a bit of a synchronicity, which is part of my intention here to talk a little bit about that. As it turns out, I look like I'm living off grid, but it's all involuntarily. Let me just tell you that much. So let's see.
You have to reshare if you're gonna,
Yes, give me just a moment,
Okay.
and I will start that again. There we go. There it is. Okay. Now, let's see if I can get over here and do this. There we go. Okay, so now that we're past the point of talking about the internet connection, I discovered a friend here in the Philippines, and this is a woman named Kathy Block, and she has a bookstore here in Dumaguete. I talked with Gloria about her, and this is a picture of her. Her bookstore is called the XIQ Bookshop in Dumaguete. And she's become a really great friend. I've learned a lot from her about the Philippines and its people. She's the owner of that bookshop, the XIQ Bookshop. Mostly you'll find her on Facebook. So if you go and look up XIQ Bookshop on Facebook, it'll come up. And where her bookshop is just down from where the Philippine Bureau of Immigration is, where I get my visa. So that was very fortunate. So Kathy lived in the US for a while. She has been running a bookstore here in the Philippines for a number of years. She has a lot of business knowledge combined with literary experience in the Asian and US markets for books and writing. As a Dumaguete, she's also a Dumaguete area native. She has countless other qualities that are really important too. So if you notice, she was wearing a Star Trek The Next Generation shirt. And did I lose you guys?
No, I just,
Okay.
I undid the video for everyone.
Okay, that's good. Just wanted to make sure that you guys are still there. Yeah, so she's wearing a Star Trek The Next Generation shirt. And I actually had a little run-in with Patrick Stewart at one location. And in the same location, I actually ran into Charlton Heston.
Could I ask a question here? Can you
Sure.
make it full? We're getting all of your desktop. Can we?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We're seeing the whole thing.
Oh, well, give me just a moment. Let me stop the share, start the share again. And here we go. Thank you so much for telling me that. This should be just the images. Me and Charlton Heston. There we go. So this book, Rama Revealed, which is part of Arthur C. Clarke's Rama series, is just one example of what I found in her bookstore. She had a lot of material that I was able to go through, and different books from all different genres and schools of writing were represented in her bookstore. So I have to be very thankful that she's become such a good friend here. So in talking to her, Kathy indicated that the domination of the US and the West in the book market means there are a few Filipino writers, and identifying themselves as Filipino would be limiting. Many of them use pen names or pseudonyms. Also, most of the Philippines in it, reading books is something of a rarity. And it's the younger crowd who consumes most science fiction, but it's generally films or other online digital media, which I suspect is related to the Western influence and smartphones. So what's the majority of Kathy's bookshop sales? Well, it turns out that foreigners buy a lot of her book collections, book material, but she sells anime and Korean band posters and stickers to the younger folks and to children, and that winds up being a lot of what she sells here. So what about new books, Filipino written books? Well, they're not so common. So this book is by Friar Jose Sequoia that really shed a light on the role belief systems, religion, Christianity, and the Catholic Church plays here in the Philippines. Being 85% Catholic, poor, and educationally challenged, the conditions in the Philippines was no trivial consideration in finding a book that would represent it. Also, being an openly married gay couple was a concern, but I did not allow that to have any kind of priority. I've talked to Filipinos who would consider reading this book as scary to them, and this was an important realization for me. So the next question is, what inspires science fiction writing in the Philippines? And, for me, it's been everything from just about everywhere. This is an image from a friend of mine back in the U.S. Who had a T-shirt with this image on it, and I would tell him, "Please don't wear it," because I could not stop looking at it or laughing. The image was like a smorgasbord of concepts I found challenging to integrate. Not to mention, I found it humorous. Then. My husband took to putting plants all around the inside of our apartment, and a plant directly behind the primary computer station I spent most of my time at. I unexpectedly found this image of Jesus, or Charlton Heston if you prefer, in the plant. And I suddenly turned around and noticed it, and it was like something drew me to notice that. And I was like, what is drawing me to notice this? Because it was very subliminal in a sense, because it was behind me. What did this mean? As a synchronicity, I took this as an indicator of the prominence Christianity plays in all of Filipino beliefs. Oh, that's right. I guess Charlton Heston played Moses, not Jesus. That's right. Well, speaking of Charlton Heston, Harry Harrison's wrote Soylent Green, I believe back in the 60s or early 70s. And this story was set in the year 2022, which is the year that I moved here. It's interesting that this poster, the people riding are wearing medical face masks, which is interesting. And the film version starred my old friend Charlton Heston. Then to further intrigue me, I had a friend of mine sent me this photograph of two Soylent Green bottles that he discovered at on a Target shelf in Tucson, Arizona. I was like, well, that's interesting. It's an example that the anniversaries are sometimes best left uncelebrated. But I was already making my equivalent of Soylent Green here in the Philippines. By the way, this is a meatless concoction. There's no human contents in it. So I was reading a lot of historic science fiction as one of my targets. Among those, I read the series by Dan Simmons on Hyperion, or at least some of it. I explored some of Philip K. Dick's earlier works, including this book, The Eye in the Sky from 1957. And it helped me to sort of sort out for myself what I liked and what I did not like in established science fiction writing. I found this image, curiously, appeared in an article recently, and it was seen above a location in England. The similarities to an eye in the sky are uncanny. However, my association with this as an eye is a consequence of my subjective reality evaluation of the eye or the appearance, and more of an emotional source perception of the phenomena. Excuse me. Optical science says this image was formed by high altitude ice crystals in the upper atmosphere. Now, in fact, if we look at this photograph, which was taken in France a few years earlier in 2019 in the Alpine region, we actually find names labeling various optical features of this phenomena. And then if you go online, you can find some of those specific names and a description of the phenomena. So in fact, the physics of optics says this phenomenon is completely explainable. In any objective scientific evaluation, there's usually an attempt to explain scientifically what we see. For humans, an explanation may not consist of an objective experience, but contain a subjective inner component or feeling. Perhaps the event is a form of synchronicity for the viewer. I feel the challenge is to be balanced and to see such phenomena as the eye in the sky in its totality, realizing the duality of an occurrence in reality. It fills two reservoirs of experience, the objective and the subjective. Having this new awareness is just one experience that seems to have come to me from moving to the Philippines and exploring things here. So in addition to the hard science fiction novels that I read, I also read a novel called The High Kings. This was really interesting because there was an Arthurian component to this book that was something that I wanted to do some research on to understand a little bit better. And what I discovered is that for various reasons, the Arthurian tales became a consideration for me in storytelling. So part of this book contains nonfiction, while the fiction part remained primary. And those fiction parts seemed very traditional in having a historic prosaic format and existed in separate stories, kind of like a collection. The book was kind of like a collection of short stories, each of them strung together by the Arthurian legend, which was interesting to see that sort of construction. So something changed as a result of reading this book in my understanding of writing and what's possible. Now, I would categorize this far more as a fantasy type of work as opposed to science fiction. So there was a little bit of a difference there for me. So that book, The High Kings, led me to these two books, which were quite profound in terms of their playing a pivotal role in furthering my understanding of storytelling. While the Underworld Initiation was far more subjective, the structure of the writer's journey was more objective in its impact. In the Underworld Initiation, the author talks a great deal about the transition between an oral tradition and a written tradition, and how the underlying meaning that could be derived from sharing of a story is something that could technically only be conveyed orally, that writing a story out would not allow the same process to occur because it occurs from one person to another. So this book was really quite interesting to me in terms of it being a way to understand this alternative viewpoint, because where we are today with storytelling, I think, is at a turning point. It's time for storytelling to have a little bit of a change. Now, the book on the right, The Writer's Journey, was really interesting because it took some of the concepts of the Underworld Initiation book and solidified it, put it into a structure for writers to use. Now, the author, Christopher Vogler, he cut his teeth, so to speak, on the film industry in Hollywood, and some of the principles that he came up with, which was an understanding of the mythic structure of storytelling, was formulated into a series of principles, things that were successful in storytelling that they could use as a measure as to whether or not a screenplay would have those qualities or not. Now, this particular book was more about what is the translation between what works in a film story and what worked for him versus what will work for writing with these same principles. So these two books were quite interesting to me because they sort of rounded out my understanding that storytelling is really important. But there was a lot of other experiences that I had that were totaling up to something, maybe more than more than what you could consider ordinary. This
Hey,
image,
Hey, Dan, can I interrupt you a second?
sure.
You mentioned that the storytelling at this stage or at this juncture needs a change. Can you elaborate a little bit when you were talking about RJ Stevens?
Yes, I can, because the impression that I'm getting is that storytelling lacks some of the information that is needed for personal transformation. And that has been lost through the process of storytelling through a written form. The written form of storytelling solidifies content. So there's less of a sharing between individuals that happens as a result of the process of telling a story. So the transformation of storytelling is to recognize the importance of that as a process to go through and to transform how stories are written and stories are constructed today, so that they incorporate some of those principles, that they put some of those principles into them. Because of the way that information is shared so quickly, and we're moving to a place where fewer and fewer written material, less and less written material seems to be the way that the younger generation is receiving things, we're seeing a growing a preponderance of digital media being the way that people digest content. And so the first place where filmmaking starts, or where digital media starts, is in creating a story that can be conveyed. It's kind of like writing software for a computer. You can't take something esoteric. You have to define it very rigidly and go from that to something that works on the computer. It's the same thing in some regards to storytelling, particularly when media is involved. You have to have a story constructed ahead of time. That involves a different process, or what I'm thinking of is a slightly different process to incorporate some of these non-physical aspects to the storytelling process that the Underworld Initiation book alluded to. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So this this image was quite interesting, because prior to leaving the US, one day on my way to the UA office, I crossed the street in front of my building and noticed on the road this picture in front of me, the picture on the left. And it was right under my foot. So I had to move my foot out of the way to be able to see it. And I saw this picture. And then on the backside, there's this message. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just guessing. And I realized that there's something significant in this message. You know, the construction of the image that's on the right, you know, has some specific qualities of it that you could ascribe to a Christian tradition. You have 3 flowers coming out of the head of this figure, and you have 5 petals, 6 petals for the next tallest flower, and 7 petals for the flower tallest in the middle. The 3 flowers together, you know, can represent the 3 crosses associated with Christ, and the number 7 in the number of petals. My understanding of numerology, the number 7 is related to the name of Jesus Christ. So potentially and subliminally, in a sense, or subconsciously, this image is conveying a little bit of religious truth, or religious symbolism in its conveyance. But I thought that this was an interesting event to bring attention to as a synchronicity. Now, the next event I want to draw your attention to is this book. And this is a really weird story. So one day I'm sitting at my desk, and this is at my U of A job, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden an email, I see the email comes in, and I look over, and it's from the University Library System, and it's from the Interlibrary Loan Operation telling me that a book I requested has come in. And I said, well, I don't recall requesting a book by the Interlibrary Loan System. I'd done so before, but I didn't remember it. And I said, well, what's the book? And I looked at the title, and I vaguely remember the title, but I don't remember requesting the book. And so I went over and picked up the book, and this was the book that I got. Now I read this book, and there was some quite interesting stories in it. So one of the things that came from this was, we have a subjective reality, like I was describing, is the realm of storytelling. So there was some stories that were being told in this book. Science fiction writers can focus their efforts on subjectivity while drawing on the power of objectivity and the reality of science and what it supports. The plan is to create a vector to understand objective reality by making and embracing more subjective experience. That seems to be what this book was telling me, is that I needed to expand my subjective side and subjective experience and bring in that understanding at a higher level. So for me, attuning myself to be balanced in all experiences was necessary, especially for writing. I would have this come to this conclusion, still living in the US, maybe, but my feeling is maybe not. It was something that I sort of came to after the fact. So the third thing I want to talk about is some of the science research that I'm doing and some of what inspires science fiction writing. The key for me seems to be to remain open to just about anything. You have to be, or you could miss something important for your own growth. In the Philippines, I learned my mission was a difference to differentiate between objective and subjective perspectives on reality. Embracing synchronicities was part of this mission. The other thing is, you want to consider nonfiction and fiction material, but how do you separate the two? That's a real challenge, because living and writing in a different culture, my discoveries emphasize the value of story as superseding genres and superseding the assignment of a particular story to a particular genre. So achieving balance in my perception of objective and subjective reality seems to be the key to having some creative success. How can you use this knowledge to sort fiction from nonfiction? Well, maybe by combining them, such as the hybrid concept could be a solution, like what I found in the High Kings book that I mentioned before. So where's the significant thread in all this information? And science, I believe, would have some answers, maybe, or maybe not yet, it would have some answers. So as a science fiction writer, I suggest weaving a balance between objective and subjective. But how do you do this? I feel like I have to remain open to everything, all experiences, living mostly in the now, expecting nothing but be grateful for everything. That seems to be the spiritual state. But, that spiritual state has worked for me. It's a little bit different perspective. So what's some of the research that I wanted to talk about here in terms of scientific research that specifically could be integrated into a functioning as a balanced science fiction writer? Well, here's some examples I have of mainstream science providing material for exploration. I explored the dwarf planet called Sedna. It's in our solar system with a long inclined elliptical orbit. And through the science of Sedna, I gained knowledge of objective reality, yet I was finding a place where my own synchronicities can exist. Discovered in 2003, Sedna gets its name from an Inuit mythology and was an object, if not the first, officially named by the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, that departed its naming, which at the time was taken strictly from the pantheon of Greek mythological gods, goddesses, and demigods. This is an important fact to consider when looking at Sedna's role in human mythology. Its mythology is more subjective, a subjective perspective to explore meaning. So if you go over to Wikipedia and you look up Sedna, you'll come across this fairly extensive section talking about Sedna. Well, it's really interesting, and this is one of the synchronicities that I noticed, is that Sedna's period is estimated at 11,400 years, which, as it turns out, coincides with the end of the last ice age, called the Younger Dryas, at about 11,700 years ago. For me, noticing this fact was something of a synchronicity that signified I need to examine this more closely. The discovery, the naming, the mythology, and the position of Sedna. So this dwarf planet could be significant in having a deeper association with the current existential crisis in human society, which we seem to be heading for. Now, if I go back to the Wikipedia on Sedna, it's really interesting where it says that down below, Sedna's closest pass to the sun, which is the perihelion, is going to be on July 2076. So it's actually, as you could see previously, it's in a position which is close to the original position it was in during the Younger Dryas time period. And I cannot tell you how many times, 2076 is about 50 years from now, how many times the period of 50 years pertaining to how much time human society has left to get it right has come up, that 50-year time period. This is a synchronicity for me, it seems, and something that I need to pay attention to. So the next thing that I want to look at is a link between the nature of the universe and the human mind. First, let's look at our galaxy, and the name the Milky Way has been with us a long time as an astronomical term. It wasn't until the 1970s that observations revealed that our galaxy was moving relative to other known galaxies. And the movement of the Milky Way in the universe was actually part of movement of these larger groups of galaxies. Now, the first group, naturally, is called the local group, which includes the Milky Way, the Andromeda Galaxy, and other astronomical features. This is in turn inside of a larger group within a supercluster of galaxies called the Laniakea group. Here you can see the local group within the center of the Laniakea supercluster. Of course, the Milky Way is just one of a lot of other galaxies in the universe, billions of them. So this image was really interesting because scientific observations and advances allowed us to define more completely the structure of the universe of galaxies. In this 3D image of the various superclusters, which includes, as you can see in blue, the Laniakea supercluster, we have other clusters, superclusters, and attractors. Now, back in the 1980s, the Great Attractor, a gravitational well, was defined by astronomers as a source of galactic movement of various clusters of galaxies. We see on the left in this diagram, which is a little bit later than that discovery of the Great Attractor, we see the Shapley Attractor, and this led to the discovery of the dipole repeller. Now, this is the image overlaid of the dipole repeller. And the concept here is really interesting. The basic idea is that galaxies in the universe seem to be pushed and as well as pulled by areas of the universe, being attracted and repelled. This discovery of a repeller area was strongly implied by the observational data on galaxy movement. So this diagram puts the existence of the dipole repeller into a visual form. Now, this diagram wound up in a paper from 2017. And this paper, the concept of a repeller was rolled into the model that they built for the structure of the observable universe. And they defined a dipole repeller, along with a Shapley attractor, as two major forces of galactic movement in the universe. Let's see. The small arrows in this diagram, you can see each of them sort of represents known galaxies and their relative movement. So it looks pretty busy. The phi equals a number symbol represents relative areas, colored regions, where the gravity is the same, associated with the shapely attractor and the dipole repeller. The dipole repeller has a negative gravity effect, and the shapely attractor has a positive gravity effect. Now you can see the repeller and the attractor in this diagram. And in this image comes from the same 2017 paper where you have the attractor and the repeller. On the retractor is on the left. I'm sorry, the attractor is on the left in blue, and the repeller is on the right in orange. Clearly, this indicates a condition of polarity in the universe. Remember, the best that science can do is to propose a model of reality that explains what it observes. Hopefully, we can digest the facts conceptually, but remember that science often incorporates assumptions and limitations in the accuracy of what it can model as reality. Models are imperfect, otherwise they would not be models. This is an important point to remember. Sometimes scientific explanations significantly challenge our ability to understand what's going on. A good example of this is the required existence of dark matter and dark energy for scientists or astrophysicists to explain observed behavior in the universe and movement of galaxies. So as science fiction writers, understanding both integrating this information can only aid us in bridging the conceptual gap. So what underlies this is really a subjective story. And can we extract that subjective story from this? Well, here's what I want to bring to your attention. This is another scientific paper fairly recently released about 2 weeks ago, June 15th, 2023. So if we take the existence of the polarity of the universe a little bit further, we consider the old adage as above, so below. Here's a very recent paper that is significant in its implications. And it's titled Interacting Spiral Wave Patterns Underlie Complex Brain Dynamics and Are Related to Cognitive Processing. That's a bit of a long title, but here's what I think of as one of the more significant diagrams in that paper. From this paper, you can see these diagrams that spiral activity discovered in the brain during asking and answering math questions shows strong polarity in the brain's two hemispheres. The two green areas, identified left and right, are scans of the respective side of a subject's brain. This is a scans of a human brain. So in this example, opposite parts of the brain show spiral activity that is occurring in parallel, that is mirrored by each side, but with opposite directions and spin. So this is happening simultaneously in the left and right hemispheres of the brain. But look closer at this diagram. You will discover other spirals present at the same time, not only the ones that they're identifying here with the small boxes, but you will find other spirals that are happening. And they are also mirrored on both sides with opposite spin. So there's a lot of complementary spiral activity going on in the brain when asking or answering a relatively simple math question. So when we consider the human brain phenomena relative to the polarity of the universe, conceived as having an attractor and a repeller, these two conditions scream, the universe and the human brain, these two papers scream of storytelling relationship, which could be either from the universe to a human or the human to the universe. As above, so below has applicability. This is scientific knowledge ripe for storytelling. Science fiction writers can portray this reality either subjectively, emotionally, or objectively, logically. Both approaches can be valid. Any author has the ability to tap into this polarity concept, hopefully with a balanced influence that affects all creations, all of their creations. By applying this concept, it does not matter where you are on the globe, in the US, the Philippines, or elsewhere. So that sort of concludes my discussion. And the next area that I wanted to bring you guys' attention to is open discussion. So any kind of questions or anything that you have about what I presented, I want to hear what you got to say. And I'm Dan Brock, and this is my email address if you want to contact me directly. And that is the extent of my presentation.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
I want to thank you, and I'll open it to the questions in just a minute. I have a little appendix I want to add to your talk because oddly enough, which was wonderful, by the way, and it opened my eyes to some other synchronicity, if I can say the word.
Yes.
There is a film. Have you heard of Dark Matter?
I've heard of the film Dark Matter, but I've not seen it.
You should see it, and I'll tell you why. This is just exactly what you were just talking about. It's about a young, brilliant Chinese student from Beijing who comes to a cosmology lab in our West US. He is so brilliant, he's like Nobel Prize brilliant. He's working for a very egotistic Western Nobel Prize winner in cosmology. Meryl Streep is in this, and Xing Shi Zhi, I think is his name. I may be getting it wrong. The director is from the Beijing Opera. And what it contrasts, this is based on a story, I think it happened in the east of the US or in Canada, of a young Chinese grad student who killed his professor. And what it is about is the subjective experience of this student. It's a lot of it is from his point of view, coming to the US, the crashing into each other of the Chinese cosmology called Wuxing, and they even use the names of the elements, and they do not mean in Chinese what the Greek elements mean. These are subjective phases, these elements, earth, and you can look it up, W-U-X-I-N-G, Wuxing, and how the film wraps around the collisions of this Western way of looking at things. And this young man has this very moving speech in the middle of it. He says, the universe is like the mountaintop, like Mount Everest, and all you can see that's visible is the peaks. But I see it with math. I see the whole mountain. So you gotta see this. It almost is weird how much it has to do with, you know, going back and forth between not only subjective in our way of thinking of subjective, but Asian. And that film was suppressed. It was released only to 2 theaters because that synchronicity, that Virginia Tech killing happened of the professors and students by a Chinese student, another one. It wasn't the same one. So only about 2 theaters worth of people got to see it. Of course, now it's on YouTube for free, and it's just almost submerged. It may go away, so you should really check.
Okay, I will avail myself to that because that's one of the things I have time to do here is to catch films that other people bring attention to me, and I have a long history of doing that.
It's
Because
so weird that you're talking about this stuff with the cosmology, because even in the Wikipedia article about Wuxing, this Chinese way of looking at things, it says they believe the planets relate to certain inner organs of us. And, you know, I'm going, you know, it's very subjective going to the cosmos and, you know, anyway. So now I'm going to, with my little appendix, I just had to get that in. I'll open it up to your questions, everybody.
all right.
Well, I may start. This is Tim.
Hello there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. This is a great, you know, presentation, and salamat, as they say.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like, I like the Filipino culture. They're very friendly. They're very, very open, generous. And as a doctor, I worked with a lot of nurses, and I saw up close how generous and friendly they are. You are in a good spot there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just a little comment about, you know, the priest blessing the car. in the Middle East, they a lot of people would kind of slaughter if they're rich, they would slaughter a sheep, but mostly a chicken, and the blood would they sprinkle the blood on the tires, so they somehow kind of in this superstitious way ward off any bad thing. So it's very interesting that you know, a lot of cultures have their ways to do these things.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on the synchronicity? It seems that it is a very important thing for you.
Yes.
It is for me too. You know, I notice them, but then I just don't do much about them. You seem to have gone beyond. You kind of use them as stepping stones to further an inquiry. Is this because of some spiritual base, or is this just like a sign? But where is the sign coming from? And then I have another question later.
Sure. The issue of synchronicities for me is because I've been a sort of a hard science fiction person and a science fiction person most of my life. And so the concepts of alternate reality from our ordinary reality have been always encapsulated in something more rigidly definable. And what I've discovered is that to release that and to allow that to allow anything non-physical to exist in the non-physical and to reflect back to me that existence is really important. And it's a process of allowing that is going to put you into a mode where there are more and more and more synchronicities. I have synchronicities all the time. I have tons of photographs I can show you of all kinds of synchronicities. I have friends of mine that have synchronicities that have their experiences photographed as well, images. The issue with synchronicities is we're not really taught how to address them. We're not taught that that's a sign, it can be a sign that we're more connected to the non-physical than we may realize. And listening to or embracing that, it almost becomes a non-thing. The deeper that you become connected to synchronicities in your life, everything becomes a synchronicity. And that's somewhat of the objective, I think. That everything around you becomes a synchronicity because you're moving into a state where there's no separation between who you are as a physical being and who you are as a non-physical. This is, you know, one of the ideas that I've been dealing with here being, you know, firmly rooted in science as understanding science and understanding the tenets of science. You know, I think that, you know, this 50 years paradigm that I was mentioning earlier may be the time of period that we're going to find a existence of consciousness that will be proved by science, that consciousness will exist for us in a definable model that science will come up with. And that may be one of the big things that's going to herald a change in human society. And that is, to me, sort of the ultimate synchronicity. It's where you get the people, everybody sort of on board with this idea of, well, we're not really, you know, limited beings, we're infinite beings, but that's not something that we're taught typically. I don't know if that's on subject or off subject, but I wanted to put that out there as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's a fascinating subject, the synchronicity, and you know, for many they have a spiritual meaning. For others, it's like just a coincidence. For others, it's a means for exploring further. Others just freak out and they just want to shut it off. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think George Friday had her hand up.
I have had it up. since the moment Dan said, or you said, Gloria, I can take questions.
Oh,
So,
great.
I've enjoyed this, although I may have to leave y'all soon. 90 minutes is as long as I can hang, but Dan, I really like that you use the term existential. Existential. You didn't say crisis. The word crisis wasn't there. Instead of climate crisis and apocalypse. Really groovy. Don't know if I agree, but it was interesting.
Yes.
And I know based on my experience, and today being Saturday is very major. In my family in rural North Carolina growing up, Saturday was the day for horror and science fiction. And it was very, very, not rigid, but ritualistic. You know, if it was, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, maybe not, but I think it was connected to both survival and access or reality. So the horror part was, compared to, being Black and poor in the 60s and 70s in the rural South, horror gave you some perspective. At least it wasn't that bad. And science fiction is a place where you could exist, possibly, thanks to Uhura and others like that. So I'm fairly old, as you can probably surmise, given that I grew up, I was born in 1959. But these days, when I talk to younger people, especially in the last 5 or 6 years or so, especially my friend Adrienne Miller Brown and her love of Octavia Butler, tell me, Dan, do you know anything about or have any recommendations or comments on Afrofuturism? See, I can tell by looking at your eyes, it's like, what is she talking about?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. If you can describe some more of it, I might be able to comment on it. But
No, we know you don't necessarily have to. If you don't know what it is,
no,
that's information in itself. But you know who Octavia Butler is, right?
I have heard the name, but it's
Dan.
Yeah.
All right, so there are 3 great books she wrote. I can't say when because I'm not that good at these things, but the first book is set in a gated community where a family, a Black family, the dad's a doctor. Civilization has crumbled to the point where people who don't live in the gated communities, who are poor, houseless, struggling for survival, are using some kind of drug that encourages them to burn people up. So her father's doing a lot of caring, and the shit just goes south real bad, and she has to flee. She's 16 years old at this point, and it becomes like Dorothy, in The Wizard of Oz. They're on the road collecting people who are trying to survive, and they wind up creating a different culture, which is called something I'm not remembering either. And Afrofuturism is, and I think it probably surfaced not more than half a dozen years ago, but it's a collection of writers, cultural artists, and individuals with the shared consciousness or agreement of projecting a future where people of African descent aren't dead, at least. Damn, did he leave us? Did we lose Don? We lost Don. Gloria, I'll shut up and hang out with y'all till 1:30. I'm glad I joined you.
Tell you fast, look at the chat, because I do know some women of African descent. And Nnedi Okorafor wrote Binti. I think I sent that copy to Teresa by this Afrofuturist of Nigerian descent woman writer.
I will totally check that out.
She
Thank
didn't
you.
lose it when she moved. Okorafor. Anyway, you got her name once.
Yep, I'll copy the chat before I
Yeah,
go so
it's
that I can.
2 N's in the beginning. And the other one is Tanana Reeve Douay at UCLA, and she writes Afro-Gothic horror, Afro-Gothic. And I like
Afro-Gothic horror, wow.
Afro-Gothic horror. And she says that exactly what you said. Her mother used to, this is Tanana, she was the guest of honor at the World Convention of Science Fiction in Chicago last Labor Day. And she said her mother in the 60s used to read and watch horror for the same reasons because it, you know, it helped them to survive.
I was never
Almost
conscious of that
exactly
until,
your
I was
same
an
words.
adult. As a kid, we never talked about it. Our parents never said this is what's going on, but for myself, I
Oh, I got her
processed it
name.
as an adult. That's the point. And it's like Saturday, we got to get to the such and such. And I would call my brothers and often still do, what are you doing tonight for your horror? They're in Atlanta or on the road or in Texas.
Let me just spell the name correctly verbally. Nnediokораfor, because I keep having typos, and the book is
AFOR. Okay, got it.
AFOR, and Binti is the title. And she's won almost every award in science fiction. I think she's won a Hugo, a Nebula, and it's a very thin book. And I sent my copy to Teresa, I think.
Oh,
So it's very good. And yeah, there's a lot being written about women who are doing Afro Gothic writing, because you know this, George. I mean, I like science fiction, but fantasy far outstrips science fiction. So if you're at all writing for the market, a lot of the African American
Oh yeah,
women writers.
Lovecraft Country was awesome. Who did that? Margot. That was excellent. Some of it was too creepy for me because I don't like gore, but it was awesome. Three 5 stars. I rewatched it once because I didn't like the end so much, but it's awesome.
And there's also a very funny, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I did recommend it, I think, to Teresa, called Destination Planet Negro.
Never heard of it. So
Oh, you got to look it up. It's by a man who worked with Spike Lee, and his name is Wilcott is his last name, and I can't.
Okay.
But anyway, it's sort of it's amazing. You just have to see it to believe it. He's a professional filmmaker at University of Kansas.
I want to apologize for taking up any more time because I'm conscious of time and everybody's time, not just mine.
Okay, well, those are some tips. I just wanted to get them in as fast as I could, and it looks like Dan is trying to rejoin us now.
I'm back finally.
There's good stuff in the chat, but you missed it. So Gloria can get it.
Yeah, everybody save chat. You all know how to do that. I'll tell you again, it's the 3 dots. If you open the chat window, it's the 3 dots at the bottom, and it will say more if you hover over it. And one of them at the top is save chat. So save chat. I'll save it too.
And I would call Lovecraft Country Afrofuturism, even though it's set in the past, sort of, but not.
What is that? I'm not familiar with that one.
It's a series or a 1-season series, maybe 10 episodes, that was on HBO or some streaming platform that connects interdimensional travel, time travel, interplanetary travel with the story of a Black neighborhood, I think in Chicago in the 50s. Great costumes, really great costumes.
One other thing, we had a prior speaker from University of West Virginia, Paul McComb, and he's from Haiti. And he gave a talk of the voodoo, the voodoo. He connects physics with the voodoo dimensions of consciousness. So you can go into our YouTube collection of past speakers and get Paul McComb. And he talks about that, that he's trying to relate standard science.
Is Paul McComb a person of African descent?
Yes, he's from Haiti.
Good news.
Yes. And he is familiar with the whole Haitian concept of worldview or cosmos. And he tried to give us a good introduction. He has a lot of academic papers out, so you can just check up.
No, I will avoid those. I'm not excited about academia.
You don't want us to be biased. You shouldn't be biased against his papers. He put a lot of time and effort into those.
I did plenty of time in college. Dan was entertaining enough for me to endure that, okay, this could be a lecture, but it's okay. It's Gloria, I love her. But yeah,
All right, but anyway, you'll get a little bit of that in his talk. It was a lot on the same format as Dan's. So just check out the YouTube page for our group.
okay. If it's entertaining enough, I'll hang with it. Part of Dan's attraction is just the background. You get 20 minutes of just right there.
Yeah.
All right, I'm out.
Okay, so do we have any other questions from the audience? Thank you very much, George. Thanks for coming. It's her first time to be at one of ours. I'm surprised my husband has no questions. Oh, well.
I have another question, if I may.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. How to avoid, I mean, you've been in this more than I did in the science fiction, and most of the people also in the audience also. I mean, relative newcomer to science fiction. I mean, not to fiction, but science fiction. And I struggle with the dystopian nature of most of the novels, or at least how to avoid the pessimistic outlook of once you start, kind of looking into the future. Most of it is, dystopian. Correct me if I'm wrong. How to avoid that, and why is that from if I'm correct?
I think that you're correct in that assumption, that observation. And it's been my observation of a similar sort of phenomena. And, it somewhat goes back to more of an underlying understanding of what we are. I had a student that was working for me at the University of Arizona who'd written a number of screenplays, and he'd written the screenplays where people were just dying continuously. And it's like, there's no transformation, there's no growth, there's no process of this. It's all disharmonious. And this winds up being a real problem with fiction and science fiction specifically, because the overwhelming majority of content winds up being really negative. It's gotten to the point where it's difficult for me to watch movies now, because I find so much material spends a great deal of time emphasizing the negative aspects or the dystopian aspects of the environment that they are having, or there's just gratuitous, almost death porn, to the point that I just don't have any desire to take part in that. So I think that observation of yours is really valid. The only thing that I can find is that I can say is to for me, I just go and turn it off, or I start reading a couple of chapters in the book or whatever, or paragraph even, or a couple of pages, and I'll just put it down, because it obviously isn't going to go in the direction that I feel that material that I want to be connected with goes to. Plus, a lot of the dystopian experience of the characters in films and characters in stories wind up being strictly dystopian with no end result. There seems to be no transformation that comes for the hazard that they're experiencing and the difficulty that they're experiencing. Or if there is some transformation, it's so obscured that it becomes muted to the point of, well, why would I even consider this? Why would I even look at it? There was a science fiction series, I think it was called The Road, and there was a film made about this, and it was too difficult to watch. It was just a dystopian future, and it was about the destruction of society and the destruction of values. I just wound up not being able to watch it. I couldn't watch the whole film because it was just too much for me. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I do have that same sentiment that you're expressing, that there is a lot of dystopia. But my solution has been just to use my discernment, recognize that this doesn't align with me, and simply walk away from it. There are quite often times that my husband here in the Philippines will be watching something. It's like, I can't even have the sound of that on. You know, I can't have the sound even coming from another room, you know, is too much for me to experience. And I say, you have to cut that off. I can't endure that.
Dan, we have a hand up from Margot
Yes.
Shelter.
Yes, just a quick question that, and I apologize for ignorance here. The languages that occurred in the Philippines would be Tagalog and Spanish. Is there science fiction in these languages or other languages in the Philippines that you know of?
There is some science fiction here that is available, but it's pretty far and few between, at least that I've seen in the native language. I haven't come across that much science fiction material that's in the English that's written by Filipinos. Now, my friend Kathy Block could probably say specifically about what's created, because she would know that. But I don't know myself of anything off the top of my head that is of Filipino origin that's science fiction based.
Dan, if you could get her to make a short list, I can put it in our next newsletter.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, because you know, I think it's very important that that be represented, because it's a voice that needs representation in the world. That's something I'm discovering here in the Philippines is you know, the lack of representation of the people sometimes. How do you transform that? How do you get the people motivated to express themselves? And you know, what I find is this balance. It's just like that is substituted by the place that family and society has and culture has in their identity. So their identity is more about family and the society and the culture that they're a part of, rather than identifying specifically with a certain type of behavior that might be more Western. Now, the younger generation, I find there is more behavior that they're displaying that matches with what we're seeing from a lot of Western kids, kids from the United States and in Europe. That's a little bit disturbing, because it's the ubiquitousness of this phenomena of the influence of Western society and media over the identity of different cultures across the planet.
We certainly see that in Dark Matter. And this film is going to be the subject of discussion next, I think it's April. Let me check my calendar here. All right. I have it all on little scraps of paper. We've got PJ Manny and Hua Li. Hua Li is a professor of Chinese science fiction of the 21st century, and they're both going to come and talk about Dark Matter, the film. And so that this will be exactly what I'm trying to get across here, is that Wu Xing system that they have going is represented in that film by these giant calligraphic characters, you know, in various points in the plot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible. My husband said so. He's an astronomer. I mean, it's incredible on how much they see the psychology of the West and the arrogance in this film. It's incredible. The man who was the Nobel Prize winner is just, he's very well played by Aidan, is that how you say his name, Quinn? And so, you know, if you want one movie that really gets to the heart of a lot of this and that was suppressed, but not for the reason that it critiques Western culture, but because it was based, that's at least the cover story, because it was based on a murder case that they were afraid might have been too
Yeah. Well,
you know, they might have been afraid it would get more prejudiced against Asians, to put a kind construction on it.
I see. Yeah, invariably this goes back to, the question about dystopia That's one of the things that sells. The zombie apocalypse really sells, and a lot of media and content. There are people that make business decisions about what's going to sell the most of, as opposed to necessarily what could be the best story to tell.
Well, this
So-
story is not depressing, even
Yeah.
though it involves a murder, because you get to see what goes on, that step by step, how that young man is treated, and the real collision, you know. So I don't think it's what we need is utopia only. I think that stories like this can be very educational because it shows the reality. And unfortunately, it has been a history of many missed opportunities. And the bridge character is Meryl Streep, who is very sympathetic to this and trying to do what she can do as one person to learn about the other way of looking at everything.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to that then. That's going to be on my list to
I hope
watch for
to see
sure.
it. And then come to the discussion next April. So yeah, we've got so much on the table here and so many points of view. So yes, story is important. And when you have a head, I will actually use the H word, hegemony. When you have a hegemonic culture where one, whether you say ethnicity or class or social economic capitalist system is so all pervasive, then everything else gets run through a vegenatic and you only get it in bits and pieces. But that one hegemonic thing is very linear and narrative and coherent, whereas everything else is just a flash here and a flash there. You actually see that in Europe now, because I had a project called Planet Europa SF, and again, we never got a publisher. And it was going to bring in translation science fiction stories from all over Europe, you know, from the West to the East. And they were short stories. And I was just told, forget it, you know, nobody wants this stuff. And so I was talking to our various contributors, and one of them was busy. He had a big online magazine called Planet Europa, and it was like the newszine of all European science fiction. He had a very interesting way of putting it. He said, to us, with all of our various languages, which we don't all speak each other's languages, it's like the US is the neutron star. It sucks our fiction in, and then if it's translated in US editions into English, we can all read English, and that's how we get to know each other. Like the gravity of a neutron star.
Interesting,
Isn't
interesting.
that interesting?
That is interesting.
Imperialism is a bitch, you're right.
No kidding.
Yep. Thanks a lot for this. I'll see you next time if I can.
Thank you.
Okay, good, George. Thank you for coming.
Yes, peace and blessings. Bye, y'all.
Peace to you all.
Yep, yep.
So are we near are there any more observations, or we are just so thrilled to have this window to where you are, and I can't tell you enough. So please watch Dark Matter. You do come
Okay.
back for that one, because you will have every opportunity to do your synchronicity. And that's an advanced plug, which I know I'm overdoing it, but they're both good. PJ Manny and Hua Li are both good, and they will bring the Hollywood, because she's worked in Hollywood. You can look her up, PJ Manny, M-A-N-N-E-Y. She gave last month's talk, I think it was. And Hua Li was about 2 years ago, and she talked about Chinese science fiction that is in the 21st century. And they both are going to watch that film and then discuss it for us.
Just briefly, what is the name of the Haitian gentleman that you mentioned?
I just sent you an email, I think, about him, Paul McComb, or else I sent it to George Friday.
Paul McComb.
McComb, MC. I'll also email you. I think I only
Okay.
emailed it to George, but since you're
Yeah,
interested,
email me because I'm interested in that phenomenon. That has some relationship to some of the phenomena that I've come across here.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Paul's post was to George Friday, and I will get that one forwarded to you. I was just in the midst of sending you the link to Dark Matter too. Okay, so I will forward this. And that's
Okay.
oops, wait, no, I didn't get you in there. Okay, so yeah, so shall we wrap it up then?
I think so.
Yeah,
I think we're about ready to
Thank you
wrap.
guys very much. Anyone else, last calls?
Looks like they're all still here, but they're not asking anything. So we appreciate you coming, and we will see you next month. And next month, oh, let me say who's next month. Next month, okay, darn. Oh, it's not Robin Murphy anymore. It's Tosi Abegdaga, who's going to be talking about AI is going to eat your grandmother's knickers. So I hope you will all come for that, because we've been having like a prairie grass fire of stories, getting everybody worked up into the most hysteria you can imagine about AI. And we're going to have a couple speakers in the future on that one. So we'll see you then. And meanwhile, don't defend yourself against AI as best you can.
As best you can is
Yes.
the case.
Okay.
All right. Thank you guys all very much. I'm grateful.
thank you, Dan, it was great.
All right. And please feel free to message me if you have any questions, anything at all. Thank you
All right.
again.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.